Okay, so for those, I'm going to go ahead and start this bad boy up. Um, we're doing our first video cast slash podcast about Hearthstone. Um, I'm Dan, and this is
This is Drew.
Drew.
Yeah.
So since we're people probably don't recognize us and don't know who we are really, introductions are in order, I would suppose. Um, we have been making videos for a little while on and off for our local card shop, but at the time we were talking about Magic, about standard, constructed, going over tournament lists, things, events that Drew's played in, or things that we had at our local shop, because we are lucky enough to have an extremely talented Magic player base in our area. Um, so we'll go ahead and Drew introduce himself, tell him a little bit about what he's done, some he's done in Magic, and I guess you would say credentials in terms of card playing. So go ahead.
Sure. So, for Magic, I've qualified for the Pro Tour a couple times. I've actually won, I guess you could say, kind of the trifecta of PTQs. I've won a limited PTQ, a standard PTQ, and a modern PTQ. I've top eighted a Grand Prix. And then for the World of Warcraft trading card game, which is now defunct, I have, I think, three Dark Moon Fair top eights, a Nationals top 16, a Nationals finals appearance, and a couple top 64s at Worlds. So yeah, that would be probably the I guess the highlights of what I've done. I went 5-1 in a draft at the Pro Tour, so that got me cash, so that was nice.
Okay, and so as far as my credentials, I guess you would say, go, I haven't been nearly as successful as Drew, but like I said, I play Magic with Drew a lot. I played the wild card game with him. We've had a number of people at our local shop all have appeared on the Pro Tour that we play cards with regularly, draft with them regularly. I've been playing Magic since like 1997. Picked up the wild card game early on, and when it got kind of defunct, I picked up the Hearthstone beta about 2.5 months ago. And you've had it for how long now? Just a
I
couple weeks?
think a month. Hold on, I can look up and see because I think I got it like a week before. I made top four at that.
Oh, the
Um,
mana grind or whatever.
yeah, so yeah, I think I've had it for about a month now.
Okay, so, and as far as Hearthstone goes, I'm currently rank 6. Drew is currently rank 4, though has been as high as 2.
Yeah, I kind of hit a little bit of a brick wall this weekend trying to go up from two to whatever. It was kind of frustrating because I thought I had a mage list that was pretty good that I was doing really well with. And mage wasn't super popular at this point, and then a couple of the streamers were like, "Oh, we have these mage decks," so now mage is popping up again, and people are playing. I know you were playing druid, and there's a ton of people playing druid decks to try and beat up on the mage deck. So
Absolutely. I was playing Priest all the way up until about rank 10, which was doing pretty well. I watched Forsen stream, who's one of the top EU players who's playing Priest, and kind of base a list somewhat off his. It worked pretty well, but then the meta is really fast in Hearthstone because being a solely digital card game, it's a lot easier for people to shift from deck to deck. Where you might see in Magic, oh, this deck's really popular, Mono Blue Devotion, and then something else will pop up, and it takes the cycle of the meta shifting is a little slower in other games, and since this is all digital, things can be really fast. They can change from day to day as people shift back and forth really quickly.
yeah, and I think there's a couple, actually, like several factors for why that happens. I think the first reason, like you were saying, is it's because it's digital, and part of that is that it's actually a really popular game to be streaming. Like if you ever go to the Twitch homepage, you'll
Yeah.
notice that it's generally easily within the top 4 or 5 games consistently. Like there's always, thousands of people watching.
Oh, absolutely.
So, like I know, for example, the mage deck over the weekend, this guy put together a deck that was like, it wasn't as creature oriented as the list that I had. It was much more like all our creatures draw us cards, so he's playing things like Loot Hoarders and Novice Engineers and Cold Light Oracles, and just a ton of burn and ice blocks. So the idea was have my little creatures try and do a little bit of damage early, but if they don't, it's not a big deal. I'll just draw a bunch of cards and kill you with the burn spells in my deck. And that deck, no joke, within probably 5 minutes after watching that stream, we started seeing a ton of that popping up in the constructed play.
um,
And,
oh yeah, and it's definitely, especially, it's been really nice. Is there's actually a lot of high ranked players that have been posting on like the Hearthstone subreddit. Lists are getting circulated very fast. There's not a lot of people aren't keeping secrets because it's kind of silly because it's really easy to start piecing decks together just by seeing what's in them. So people are sharing their putting it out there so people can see. So they're very quickly being adopted by other people. Um, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think another factor too, on top of it being a digital game that has a lot of popularity with the streaming, I think another factor is that because it's a brand new card game and the set is small, like, so the card pool is small in comparison to, say, like most Magic card pools or even like WoW TCG card pools. And there's a flat cost for everything, right?
Yeah,
So, like, even though Sylvanas is like arguably the best legendary in the game, it's the exact same cost as a King Crush or whatever.
yeah.
So because one, there's a flat cost for everything in the game, and because the card pool is so small, it means that it's very easy for people to shift decks. It's very easy for people to be like, oh, the whatever deck is doing really well, I can put it together super easy if I want to.
Absolutely.
Once you have a kind of collection going already. Whereas like in Magic, I think part of the reason there might be a little bit more of a stall to shift decks or whatever. Not saying that like decks are bad. Like for example, you're talking about like Mono Blue Devotion or Mono Black Devotion in Standard, which are popular decks, but it's also that people invest a lot into those decks, right? It's like if you don't have a Magic collection and you go out and you spend a couple $100s on building a deck, and that's your deck that you want to play for the next couple months, rather than being like, oh, Mono Blue Devotion isn't super popular, but this Mono Red Devotion deck's doing really well, but I don't really want to invest in it. I think that also probably contributes to the fact that people maybe don't shift decks as much in Magic as they do in Hearthstone because of that larger card pool and the smaller investment that's made to actually, completely swap a deck.
Oh, I agree completely. It's definitely is like, and sure, at the high levels, people on the pro tour aren't letting themselves being stopped by card investments. But since when you have so many people playing Hearthstone all the time of varying, calibers of play, like you said, you invest in Mono Blue Devotion, you just can't switch over to Esper all of a sudden. While these people, like you said, once you get this collection going, even more so than even in the WoW TCGs, because some of the neutral cards are so powerful. Like you said, it's really easy to shift. Like, oh, I'll just move Sylvanas over here, and I'll move this over here, and I have a Ragnaros, and I'll have my Argent Commanders. So there's so many pieces that are popular and interchangeable, and like you said, with a smaller card set, and that will change as time goes on. There's obviously noticeable items missing from the current card set that you would expect from a World of Warcraft game. We're missing Death Knights, which didn't come to the WoW TCG till later. We now have Pandaren, which I'm sure will show up, and Monks that will show up later on. Blizzard obviously is investing in the long game rather than trying to push out every possible piece of, lore, quote unquote, so to speak, immediately, like you saw in the WoW TCG.
Right. And one other thing I think that contributes to the ability to swap decks rapidly is just the actual number of cards in a constructed deck versus the number in a Hearthstone deck versus the number of cards in a WoW TCG deck or a Magic deck. The fact that you only need 30 cards, and so like you only need one copy of a legendary or two copies of a rare or an epic, as opposed to Magic where it's like, okay, I need 4 copies of X
Yeah.
and multiple 4 copies of X. So I think all those things kind of contributed to meaning that it's very easy to swap decks very rapidly. Whereas in like a game like Magic or whatever, the transition maybe from deck to deck is going to be a little bit more difficult, except for those people that happen to already have incredibly large much collections, but maybe for more the average player that doesn't invest as much, maybe invest, a couple $100 or whatever over the course of a couple months, they're only maybe going to have 1 or 2 decks put together as opposed to, hey, I can put 10 decks together super easy. So
Yeah, and I think I kind of lost my train of thought. Um, and I guess one thing that's interesting to talk about is the popularity of streaming. So many people are watching it in comparison to obviously Magic Online. And I think, Hearthstone's become so popular because one, a lot of people are following Blizzard. They're interested in Hearthstone. They see Blizzard games. Um, but I think one thing I've mentioned to other people is that you can definitely tell which companies are making software for a living. Hearthstone, even as a card game, it's fun to watch. Things happen, there's animations, there's fun things going on, as opposed to Magic, where you still have the online interface, but it's not, I guess what you'd say is not necessarily a casual viewing experience.
right. Well, I mean, to be fair, the Moto software is like 10 or 15 years old or whatever. But yeah,
Yeah.
definitely like, I agree that Hearthstone is just as a presentation of a game is a much more entertaining, system to watch. All the kind of cool little animations that are going on,
All
and
the sound
all
effects they
that kind of stuff.
invested in.
Yeah, and the actual games themselves are even, I think, faster paced in general than Magic games.
Yeah.
You can have fast paced Magic games, but you can have games that drag out for, like, a drag out game of Hearthstone is 10 to 15 minutes,
Yep.
whereas like a drag out game of Magic can go for 40 or 50 minutes fairly easily.
Yeah.
So I do agree that in terms of actual, like, as a means of digital entertainment, I think it works better than Magic, in that sense. So I do definitely
Absolutely.
agree with that.
So let's see what else. So, and I think one interesting to talk about for those who don't know, while TCG was made, it ran for quite a few years. What was it, like 7 or 8 years?
I think it was '06 or '07 when it
So
first came out.
between 6 to 8 years or something like that. And for those who don't know, it went on for a while. It shifted from Upper Deck to a company called Cryptozoic, and then Blizzard ended up kind of pulling the license on Cryptozoic. I don't know if no one can really say for sure what the true reasoning was, but we see Hearthstone, and for those who aren't aware, pretty much every piece of card art in Hearthstone was rights to art they had from the WoW TCG. Almost all of it. In fact, I'm pretty sure it might be all of it. Um, so they were reusing a lot of these assets, and there's a few game mechanics that obviously carried over from the WoW TCG to Hearthstone. Things like minions attacking into minions, death rattle, trying to reduce the mana screw that you see in Magic in the terms of in WoW you could use any card as a face down resource, while in Hearthstone you get a crystal every turn. So they definitely borrowed some elements from the WoW TCG without copying it per se, but there's definitely a carryover in how the game's played out.
Yeah, it definitely, in a lot of ways, resembles the WoW TCG. I think, probably the biggest difference, even though it doesn't seem like it might be that big of a difference, is the resource system. Um, it is a subtle difference, I think, between the WoW TCG and Hearthstone, is that, because decks constantly generate one resource, in this case, a mana crystal, every single turn, it means that, um, decks, even in the WoW TCG, even though it's like, well, I can play a land every turn, there were decks that couldn't afford to play a land every turn or a resource every turn in the WoW TCG, because you do end up running out of cards eventually.
Yeah.
But resources in Hearthstone are constantly generated. So even if you're quote unquote out of cards in your hand as like an all-in aggressive deck or whatever, you're still generating resources. So that means you can see things where there's like aggressive decks playing cards like, Pyroblast, Ragnaros, or Jiraxis, and
Mm-hmm.
those cards do pop up into aggressive decks, even though they cost 8 or 9 mana. But in the WoW TCG, you could almost never do that, like with a much quicker aggressive deck, because you still had to play your cards as resources,
Absolutely.
meaning. Right, and every card you're drawing kind of matters in an aggressive deck, like, because that's generally your only form of getting cards is just the ones off the top of your deck. So I think that difference is something that people may not have noticed yet, but it does exist, and it is a subtle difference between the two. But other than that, I think generally, attacking, attacking creatures is definitely a WoW thing. Some of the mechanics, like you said, are fairly similar. Death Rattle, as opposed to, is it called Death Rattle in Hearthstone, or is it
Yep,
called
it
something
sure is.
else?
It's called Death
All
Rattle.
right. Um, um,
They have Taunt, which is in WoW TCG was Protector.
Protector, but it is different. They do
Yeah,
play out differently. Taunt just sits there and says you can only attack taunt guys. And actually, I thought it was always an interesting kind of. I thought Protector was a more skill testing mechanic because, like, for example, this situation came up a lot where, like, say you have two Protectors in play and your opponent wants to attack your, say, like, one of them's a smaller, like say you have a 2/2 Protector and a 3/3 Protector, and your opponent has a 2/3, and they want to obviously attack into your 2/2 because they'll kill the 2/2 and still have a 2/1 left over. In the WoW TCG, you can opt to protect the 2/2 with
yeah,
your 3/3. So I actually thought that mechanic was a little more interesting. I think it's maybe a little more confusing for new players to figure out, kind of like, that kind of like subtle strategy with protecting. So taunt, I can understand, is a much simpler mechanic to
yeah,
understand. So I think in that regard, they do play out a little bit differently, but same idea, the idea that, okay, now I have a creature that can actually block your
yeah.
creatures.
Yeah, and I think that's part of that might be a couple reasons, a conscious decision to make it simpler for people to pick up, but at the same time we also don't have necessarily like reactions or interrupts or passing priority where if you attack there's in Hearthstone you never be able to like okay in response I choose to protect with this guy and that's just kind of the way it works like so it's simpler it also fits into the Hearthstone mechanics.
Right. Basically, it's a pretty much purely turn-based game, right?
Yeah.
Like you do everything on your turn, they do everything on their turn, and then you just pass back and forth.
Yep.
And even secrets are basically just sorcery speed traps, I guess you could say, or
Yeah.
whatever you want to call them, where a certain trigger or a certain condition happens, and then the secret goes off.
hmm So, so we kind of started talking about the meta, how fast it changes and things like that, and you briefly just talked about aggro decks and how since there is a constant generating of resources, aggro decks can feel okay playing a few end game bombs and not having to worry about oh did I have enough resources to do it, such like things like Pyroblast or Draxus. Um, do you think that's one? We know that a lot of the neutral and aggro cards are very powerful, and so obviously, I think like you touched on, this constant generation of resources is lending itself to the popularity of aggro decks.
Um, I think there's a couple reasons why aggro decks may be more popular. One is that they're generally cheaper, much cheaper to put together than the control decks.
That's true.
The amount of dust it takes to craft a good warlock deck is much lower than I think the amount of dust it would take to craft a good, say, druid deck. Um,
For example, I
you know,
have my druid list up on the screen right now, on the stream, and in this list I have Ysera, I have Ragnaros, I have Sylvanas, I have two Ancient of Wars and an Ancient of Lore, all and those are so all epics and legendaries right there. So compared to the Warlock lists or the Mage list where your most expensive thing is a Pyroblast.
Right. I mean, ideally, those decks probably want to play like in the Warlock deck. You definitely want to play Leroy,
Oh, of course, of
if you
course.
can. That's the kind of more like optimized. I kind of need Leroy for this to be good. Um, but it's not like super crucial. It'll make your games better because it's obviously, like if I get them at 10, I can Leroy Power Overwhelm and kill them, as opposed to if they're at 10 and I have an Arcane Golem, kind of the war substitute for
Yeah.
Leroy. I can't kill them or whatever. But I think the deck still functions very similarly, so it's not going to hurt you too badly, especially starting out in the lower ranks of play, to have an Arcane Golem as a rare over a Leroy Jenkins as a legendary. But in a deck like a Druid deck, you kind of have to have, if you want to play the control deck, you could probably get away with it, but I think you would definitely feel much like your end game would be much worse than it would be in a
Yeah.
Warlock deck.
Yeah. And so I know you got into the game about a month ago, but before you got in, before they put in the ranked play, and when I started playing, it was nonstop complaining about priests and one turn kill hunters. And there's also another card they nerfed Battle Rage for warriors because they felt it was too strong of card draw. The problem people were having with the, people really liked to complain about mind control, and this has been addressed. We won't spend too much on it. It's kind of the meta's kind of moved on. They ended up nerfing it, costing it 10 resources because they felt coming down on 8 was unfun to play against. Just like they felt like the one-turn kill hunters were unfun to play against. Hence the change to Unleash the Hounds. Um, Unleash the Hounds before the nerf was all beasts got +1 attack and charge, and now it generates one guy for every minion your opponent has. So they've nerfed
Basically
these.
unplayable.
Yeah, you see it in a few really odd gimmick decks. People think it's cutesy if your opponent has a full board of things, but it doesn't do much. I know the priest list I was playing actually cut mind control out completely because what a lot of people I think missed with mind control was that mind control was never by default, it wasn't going to be an optimal play. It was always dependent on you already having tempo and what your opponent played. Obviously, if you've controlled the board the whole game and your opponent runs out Ragnaros into an empty board, hey, great for you. But against you see the mind control got cut out of lists when they were trying to fight aggro decks. There's no reason to have a 10 costing cost mind control if you were dead on 7. You weren't getting to that point in the game. And that's why I think, and then Druid became popular, Paladin became popular. One, because they have the healing spells, which, funny enough, Priests didn't have outside of Holy Fire. Um, and they had end game cards that weren't necessarily reliant on your opponent's board state. So you've been playing. You're still playing Mage, right? Or have you been brewing up something else?
No, I've pretty much been playing mage. I play warlock every now and then. I probably should just be playing mage though, like so.
So you've been playing Mage, and we know that there's been a few different variations of Mage, and we just had a recent round of Mage. Well, I don't throw out the term nerf, but they changed the casting cost of free spells. Now, obviously, those changes only affected a subsection of the actual Mage decks available. Do you think it was? I'm in the opinion. I think they should have adjusted Ice Block, actually, of all cards, instead of the actual freezing spells. While sure they were nerfs, I don't think it addressed an actual problem, just a kind of a maybe an inaccurate band-aid fix. What do you think about?
Um, I mean, definitely the nerfs to mage pushed that specific deck out of the out of the metagame. Like the freezing giants deck is, no longer viable. And I think a big part of that problem was the Blizzard nerf,
Mm-hmm.
because the difference between being able to, stop your entire opponent's board and potentially kill most of their stuff versus the aggressive decks on turn 5 and turn 6 is really big. Um, so I think it definitely pushed that deck out. Obviously, I don't think it did too much to hurt the more creature-oriented
Mm-hmm.
mage decks. Um, I mean, I kind of liked having Blizzard as just a one-up anyways in the creature decks because it's obviously much cheaper than Flamestrike. In the decks you want it versus Warlock, a lot of times you're trying to race them. But I think those a lot of those mage decks have just kind of shifted over to playing Ice Block over, say, Blizzard to give them the extra turn they need versus Warlock a lot of the times anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's maybe there could be an argument I think made that maybe Pyroblast is too powerful. The ability to say, if you can position your game to get to the point where, you know, um, you can just land a pyroblast coupled with a fireball by turn 8 and make sure you don't die in the meantime and do enough damage with your creatures early on, you're going to end the game pretty quickly. I know, for example, one game of ranked I was playing versus a shaman deck, and I couldn't do any damage with my creatures. He constantly kept killing them. Lightning bolts, forge lightnings, fire elementals, lightning storms. You know, I like every time I played a creature, it just died.
I actually have
Um,
that shaman list put together.
and he attacked a harvest golem token that got left behind, and took 2 points of damage, and I still killed him in that game. Like literally doing 28 points of burn to him. So I mean, there's maybe an argument to be made that like Pyroblast is too powerful, but at the same time, I kind of do feel that like the decks have kind of adjusted for Mage. Like Warlock is really fast. I definitely think it's generally faster than the Mage decks. So it can come out quickly and end them before they can set up their, I'm going to kill you with Pyroblast or whatever. And the Druid decks play a ton of healing.
Hmm.
The Paladin decks play a ton of healing. So it may be possible that Mage is, though, pushing out a lot of the other classes because of the existence of all the burn, right?
Yeah.
It's like you were saying where Priest has pretty much one. It has Holy Fire, which, I mean, really, if you look at Holy Fire is fairly, in my opinion, is a fairly mediocre card.
Hmm.
You kind of have to play it, but it's like 6 mana to deal 5 and heal 5 is not really the most exciting card to be playing.
Yep.
Whereas if you compare that to, I think, like Guardian of Ancient Kings, 1 more mana and you get a 5/6 out of the deal, which I think is better than like a burn spell most of the time.
Yeah.
And it heals 1 more. It is kind of funny to me that Druid and Paladin have really good healing, and Priest and Shaman has no healing.
That's
at
true.
all. Like has no way to recover health. And Priest has a very mediocre healing card. It has its hero power,
Yeah.
Which is decent, but it doesn't have any other sort of healing in terms of being able to heal itself. But I think because of Pyroblast, I think classes are kind of forced out because they just can't race.
Yeah.
Right? Like a class like, even if there was like possibly a hunter deck, it may be difficult for them to survive if it did exist because they can't race the burn. So.
Yeah, and I think what that goes back to is that since we talked about the problem is Pyroblast is fairly non-interactive. There's nothing. It's not some monster creature that hopefully you can kill with a spell or get someone in front of it. And technically, the only class that can actually interact with Pyroblast is the class that can actually cast Pyroblast. So, and I think that's where part of the problem is that it is uninteractive, and Blizzard wants the game to be fun. That's why they didn't like to Unleash the Hounds deck. They didn't want people to feel like they were helpless. I think that's where the problem comes with Ice Block. I know when I was playing my Priest, there were plenty of games where I felt I had board control, I had presence on the board, I had cards in my hand, but Ice Block stopped the game. It was essentially a time walk whenever the mage needed it the most. And I think while Pyroblast might have killed me, Pyroblast ended up being the card that made me lose the game. Ice Block, I mean. Yeah, Ice Block was the card that made me lose the game. Because of them getting that, oh, you have fantastic board control, I'm just going to get this extra turn to kill you. And I think that's where a lot of the problem lies, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. I mean, I can definitely see why, like, the ice block problem, because obviously, if they do something like ice block fireball you, because sometimes all they need is the 1 extra turn to get the burn off to kill you, and that's what ice block lets you do. Now, obviously, you can't couple ice block super effectively. I mean, if you play it early enough, though, like if you play it before they can really kill you, and then you can go pyroblast you, and then you're like, well, I have lethal, but I'm just going to pop the ice block, and then they just pyroblast you because they drew both pyroblasts, and it's like, that it is 20 points of damage, which is 2/3 of your health,
And there's no danger in playing Ice Block early.
Right.
Like, since Hunter, which unfortunately is pretty much unviable, is the only class that has a secret destroying ability and flare, no one can actually pop Ice Block unless they actually trigger it, which is kind of what the mage is setting up for. So that being said, mage is what it is. People are adjusting the best they can. While some classes remain unviable, for now, people are trying to adjust, like you said, with Druid and Paladin. Now, I don't know about you at the levels you were playing, but I noticed groups of decks that I would see at various levels. So when I was playing the other night, when I went from 10 to 6, I started off with my priest. I was playing priest, was all right, and I was just dealing with a lot of random stuff around rank 10. I jumped into shaman between like 8 and 9 because I was facing warlock after warlock after warlock, and it got me really good. I got to 7. I played through most of 7 as mage, but I didn't hit 6 yet, and I was ended up fighting mage. I kid you not, I played mage versus mage for an hour, exchanging wins on who was going to get the better setup for Pyroblast. And at that point is when I'm like, okay, well, since this group of levels, at least at the time, is all mages, I'm going to switch to Druid because that's all I'm fighting. And I spent another 45 minutes playing. I got my wins, hit up rank 6, and called it a night. Did you notice any type of grouping as you were leveling or at the higher level, higher ranks or anything like that? Some people claim they see it at the 15 to 20 and 15 to 10, or I was curious if that you've noticed that trend anywhere else.
Um, I think in the higher levels, you tend to play the same players
Hmm.
a lot because obviously you're drawing from a smaller pool
Of
of
course.
players. So you end up like, for example, I know like I've queued versus, like there was one time I think when I like um, was playing. This was before they did the freezing changes or whatever. And I was still playing the creature mage, and I ended up queuing versus like the same guy like 5 times in a row. So you end up like, and then obviously there's the whole like, do you want to play this match or do you not want to play this match? And at the time, I felt like the creature mage deck actually, if you knew how to play the matchup, had a very good matchup versus the freezing giants deck.
Hmm.
So I just like kept queuing because I wanted to keep playing the guy, and I think I got like 4 out of the 5 wins out of the 5 times I played him or whatever. But then there's other times, when I queue up and I'm like, I'm hitting like, and I don't mind the druid matchup too much with the creature versions. They obviously, I don't think it's like super favored. Like I don't feel like, oh, I'm like 80% or whatever. I'm maybe, but I don't feel like it's like, oh, I'm like definitely gonna lose this match or whatever. I, you know, just depending on their draw versus my draw. But if I like say hit um, like Paladin, generally I don't really like that much. Paladin has a ton of healing, um, so I'll like just dodge it or whatever, and like just basically sit there for a couple minutes. So you end up playing the same players a lot.
Hmm.
Like I've played I think Specialist 4 times.
Oh, huh.
Yeah, over the times I've queued. I've beaten him 3 times. I think I've played Reynad 3 times, and I've beaten him 3 times. So like you do end up seeing a lot of the same players, pretty consistently.
Okay. Um, so we've talked about a lot of different things about the meta decks that are being played, people shifting. I want to talk about. We have our little list here of interesting things, mechanics, and strategies that we see in Hearthstone that you don't necessarily see in other card games just because of the nature of the game. So one of the things we talk about is this is a smaller card set, but there's actually a lot more cards that have randomness involved in them. Um, you have things like Sylvanas, which is powerful card, but random. Usually you want to control the randomness as best as possible. You have things like Mad Bomber. You have things like just a lot of different cards like Mind Control Tech,
Knife Juggler.
Knife Juggler. Yeah, I don't know how I forgot Knife Juggler. Yeah, Knife Juggler, and until they fix the placement bug, Defender of Argus.
Oh, trust me, I was super frustrated when like my opponent had um, a 4/6 out, right? The 4/6 taunt guy in Druid, and my board is a Dark Iron Dwarf, a Leper Gnome, and a Fairy Dragon. It's my turn, and I have a Dire Wolf Alpha, and I plop the Alpha between the Leper Gnome and the Dark Iron Dwarf, right? So, and like on my screen, I actually wish I would have taken a screenshot of it. And this is the funny. This is like for me to jump up to rank 2. Now I'm back to rank 4. But it's like the image is all the way to the left is the fairy dragon. To the right of that is the Dark Iron Dwarf. To the right of that is the Direwolf Alpha. And to the right of that is the Leper Gnome. But the Fairy Dragon and the Leper Gnome had the buff, and not the Dark Iron Dwarf. So I couldn't run my Dark Iron Dwarf into his taunt guy and then use my hero power to kill it. So instead of being like, well, I can trade my Warrior for your taunt guy, I just had to like change my play, which is much worse because I had my Leper Gnome and my Fairy Dragon, and then have the. And it's not terrible versus Druid anyways to like throw the Leper Gnome away because it's very easy for them to kill it, but it's still kind of frustrating when it's like that play I wanted to make. I've seen the hand bug is also annoying. Anyway, so enough about the bugs. We know those exist, and that's
Yeah.
a problem. In terms of the random effects, it can be very frustrating for those to get you. When it's like, for example, I was playing a game earlier today where I think my opponent like had a knife juggler or whatever, and I was like, just don't hit my guy. It was some random effect, ended up going his way, in his favor, and it ended up putting me really far behind. Well, I managed to get him to 13, and I have a water elemental out and some other creatures. He killed everything but the water elemental. So my board is a water elemental. His board is like nothing, and then he plays.
Hold on. I think your mic's cutting out just a little bit.
Okay, so if you hit my.
Drew, your mic's cutting out a little bit.
I kill him. But I mean, I've had knife juggler procs go so terribly wrong where I'm like, okay, one of them has 1 toughness, and knife juggler, you don't even have a knife juggler out. You play a knife juggler and play 1 creature guy with 1 toughness, and I'm really like, it can be pretty frustrating.
Okay, can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Your mic was cutting out a whole, like, intermittently throughout that little bit about knife juggler and Ragnaros and stuff like that.
Sorry, my headset's been like acting up. I think it's something with the wiring, something in it. I don't know.
And it only just started. I think we've been good the whole time, just up until that little last bit.
Basically, knife juggler is either like the best creature in the game or the worst creature in the game, and I can't figure out which.
And it's like, Ragnaros. You're like, okay, Rag, just once, hit the guy. Hit the guy. No, you hit the Argent Squire. Sweet.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing that you've noticed that's in Hearthstone is the importance of minion placement. Barring out the Defender of Argus and the creature switching bug, there's a lot of decisions to be made based on where creatures are placed. Whether it's putting a stealth or a fairy dragon in between somebody so they can't Cone of Cold, or placing minions down at certain positions next to flame tongue totems so that when you're going to run one guy into somebody and it dies, the next one will move over and get the flame tongue buff. A lot of different things like that where you put your minions actually makes a difference, which I think is an interesting element that you don't see in other card games, since like in paper card games you can just move everybody around.
Yeah, I think the placement thing mattered more when Cone of Cold was actually a card that was being played.
Of course.
Because you could obviously do things like put your fairy dragon in between your 2 other creatures so they could only cone 2 of your creatures and not all 3 of them. It still does matter for like where you place your creatures. Potentially in, from turns 2 to 4 can matter for like defender. So like say you have like 3 you're gonna play a creature and it's gonna be your 3rd creature, and then you want a defender next turn or whatever. It can matter where your creatures are. I don't think it matters as much, mostly because of the Cone of Cold thing, like Cone not really being a card. I'm trying to think.
There's
other cards.
There are.
Besides, so there's Cone of Cold.
There's Betrayal. For Rogue, it's not seen. It doesn't see play in Constructed, but I find it a great card in Arena. I was playing Rogue run that I did last night, where I ended up with 9 or 10 wins, and there was multiple times where someone threw down a Defender of Argus, used their guys to kill a couple of my guys, and be like, "Great, Betrayal and Defender of Argus, and he murders his buddies, and it's fantastic.
Explosive shot is
Oh,
what hunters
explosive
have,
shot.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so there's a couple where positioning matters. It's probably one area where I don't do it correctly more than I should, because like you said, it's not really an element in most other card games.
hmm
Like in most other card games, it doesn't matter where you put your creatures.
Yeah.
You know, like you can put them behind your lands, in front of your lands, in between your lands.
um,
They the exact same thing. So
and I've seen some plays that I've had to do in arena and a little bit of constructed on with like the flame tongue totem, like I mentioned, where you're expecting certain creatures to die or certain creatures to pop up. You're like, okay, who's going to be next to the flame tongue totem next, or who's going to be next to this, things like that. So it's no, obviously some cards ignore it, things like swipe where they just murder your board and things like that. But it's definitely an interesting element you don't see in a lot of other card games. You don't, just because, like you said, you can put them wherever you want, you can move around wherever you want. But in Hearthstone, your hand's right where it's at, so you can always tell if your opponent's gonna play the card that they top decked, and you're like, no, I lost the top deck, or where their creatures are. It's a static thing; they don't get shifted around. So moving forward, are you, with the meta changing, are you sticking with the mage? Are you going to jump on a paladin train? Are you still feeling good with the list? What do you think you're doing moving forward?
Well, I am kind of constrained by my card selection. I haven't spent any actual physical money on the card game. I've basically just played Arena to kind of cobble together a collection, and then played Constructed a bunch. So at this point, I'll probably just keep playing Mage because it's what I have. I wouldn't mind putting Druid together, but there's a significant investment I would have to
Yeah.
make in terms of having to get deaths and stuff. I haven't really been playing Arena a whole lot, and I actually need to, I think, start playing that more so that way I can, get more gold, get more deaths and things like that. So I'll probably just stick with playing the Mage for the time being.
Okay. And I think one interesting thing is that the card pool is smaller right now, and I think maybe that's why Blizzard's been a little, I don't want to say eager, but willing to maybe change cards. This might not be a problem later on when the card pool is larger, where there's more possible answers to things. Right now we have a very small card set. It's like, okay, we need to do something about mind control. We want to stop Unleash the Hounds, or we want to change these freezing spells. But as they release new cards, I think most likely we're going to see fewer actual live card adjustments, because whether people remember it or not, this is actually beta. Um, and as cards get released, I think more answers will pop up naturally, where we'll see less of Blizzard patching cards.
Um, I don't know. I mean, it is a whole. It's an entirely different thing where it's purely digital,
It's true.
construction. So they maybe their solution for fixing problems in the metagame is just to patch cards.
It's true.
Um, it doesn't impact, and they're being able to get a full refund or whatever for the prices they're fixed for people, quote unquote, investing in that stuff.
That's true.
The thing is, like in a game like Magic Online, obviously they could code cards differently, but they can't do that because
They want to keep it seamless
right,
between paper Magic and digital Magic.
right, exactly. Magic Online cards have to match what paper Magic cards do, and in a game, constructed like Magic from physical cards, you can't go around and physically change cards. You can errata things, but I can't remember the last time Magic has had an actual errata for something.
They've
And on
gotten
top of
really
that,
good at their rule text.
right, and you can't do something like, oh, we printed Tarmogoyf at one in a green, and it really should have been one in double green. They can't go around,
Yeah.
like, and add a green mana symbol to, or say, now Tarmogoyf costs one green in a green.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so, I mean, it may be possible for Blizzard to just say our solution to problems that happen is to just, you know, just to to errata them, or not errata them, change them,
And
whatever
that's
you want to
true.
call it.
I guess since there really is not really a downside to doing it, because like you said, it's not a big deal for them to be like, oh, we're nerfing card X, go ahead and disenchant it for the cost of whatever cards you want of the same rarity. So that's true. I mean, they could stay fairly willing to adjust these cards um, if they do find something to be unfun, degenerate. Like they said, they have commented saying that we're changing this because it is unfun to play against. Obviously, Blizzard wants to make money off the game. It's free to play, but they are going to, let's face it, they're going to make tons of money off microtransactions. But at the same time, with Hearthstone being easier to pick up for the casual player, they want to make sure those people are having fun. And one of the problems they had with Mind Control was that Mind Control, and I'll be honest, was that since it was a base priest card, people at very early levels or very low, high levels, however you want to say it, beginning players would encounter mind control. And for them, being new to card games and Hearthstone or whatnot, it was incredibly unfun. While as opposed to it was widely accepted that Priest, as far as base cards go, without any additional comms or whatever, had the strongest base cards. While decks like Warlock or Mage were weaker than Priest when you only consider the base cards, and that's when you were seeing unfun comments about mind control. But as soon as you started unlocking other cards like Pyroblast or some of the Warlock's other abilities, where it started passing the Priest, um, did those decks actually start to gain their power, I guess you would say. So it was definitely Blizzard taking an interest in saying, okay, we're gonna have our people who play at a high level. They're going to push it for esports, but they definitely want to entice new card players, casual players, and for them, that fun experience is a very, very crucial element.
Yeah, that's true. Um, I mean, I, I think making changes like I said, I think it's fine. I'm not like I don't know. It's different though. It's definitely a different experience. I think coming from physical card games and knowing that whatever is out is out. Now you don't have to worry about, I guess, cards getting banned. So I
That's
guess
true.
that's one thing is you don't have to worry about a specific card getting banned or whatever. But it can be a little jarring when you're like, okay, I'm playing this deck, and then 1 week later your deck changes because obviously they've done something to change the card or whatever. Whereas in Magic, you're like, okay, I'm playing this deck. Even if I'm worried about cards getting banned, I don't have to worry about that for 3 months or whatever, however long it was between bannings.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a predicted time where you could be like, okay, I can expect them to make a banning announcement on this date. Whereas with this, it's like, okay, everything can be all hunky dory for a month, and then all of a sudden, Blizzard decides, okay, this card's too powerful, so we're gonna change it.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more jarring. I think in that sense, I knew when they announced the mage changes, I was like, okay, so I like started brainstorming like what can I do differently when this happens, and then it happened like 2 days later or whatever. So I was like, oh wow, it's already happened. These cards are already costing 1 mana more. So
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting how fast they turned that one around. The mind control one took a little while. They announced the mind control nerf and planned changes to Unleash the Hounds at BlizzCon, and it took them a long time to actually get it. Because at BlizzCon, when they announced they were going to change Unleash the Hounds, they didn't have a solution yet. And then they finally patched it. Then these mage changes came around with much, much faster turnaround than what we saw from Mind Control, Unleash the Hounds, and Starving Buzzard, who should be mentioned.
yeah,
Which
why? I understand the mind control changes. I understand the mage changes. Why was Starving Buzzard? Why did he have to be a 2/1 and not a 2/2?
So I think
Like,
I think that might have been a
I don't understand.
misinterpretation. I think honestly I think they might have misinterpreted how Starving Buzzard was played. In most cases, the Starving Buzzard, I think people in charge of that change thought that Starving Buzzard was played and left on the board for more than a turn. So that if we reduce it to 1 health, it can be killed by rogues and mages and druids and stuff like that. But in reality, it was I play Starving Buzzard as my first creature for the turn. play 5 more beasts and then combo off and kill you. So having 1 health actually didn't make that much of a difference because most of the time that guy wasn't being run out until they were ready to kill you anyways.
Is it
So
that big a deal? Like, I mean, like even if you're playing Buzzard as a purely value creature, something you play on turn 2. So like, say you play it on turn 2, and then on turn 3 you play, I don't know, an Iron Fur Grizzly or something, and you draw a card off of it. Like, it's a 2/2 for 2 that maybe gets you value.
yeah,
Maybe it seems more situational to me than the some other 2-drop cards that give you value, and like he's contingent on being able to play like another card, not having a card already in play. Because I'm thinking of like Argent Protector, for example, right?
yeah,
Like, is the Paladin 2-drop where like they could be like, oh, I have a guy in play. Okay, Argent Protector. Okay, now I got value out of my 2/2 creature. Um, you know, in terms of as like a value creature, I don't know. I don't understand Blizzard's change there. The Unleash the Hounds change made sense if they don't want a uninteractive combo deck in the game, then like sure, change to Unleash the Hounds because that's obviously the crucial card for the combo.
hmm
But changing Starving Buzzard like makes zero sense to me at all. But anyways,
yeah.
so it doesn't matter
So
that much.
I guess there's one more fun deck to talk about that I just saw popped up. Someone posted it on the Hearthstone subreddit today, and it was a warrior list that a guy used to get to rank 1 legendary for a little while. And basically, it was they ran things like double shield block to play after mages started pyroblasting, and it's essentially a 1 turn kill warrior deck, but it's not using Alexstrasza. It's using the Molten Giant Argent Commander Youthful Brewmaster shenanigans, where they armor up, they kind of control the early game. They don't do too much. They have removal in case against aggro decks, and then they get to the point where they're like, Warsong Commander, Giant, murder you. And the guy was rank 1 legendary for a little while using this warrior deck. Because as a base rule, armor is essentially more effective than health, just because of it functions like health, but there's so many cards that interact with how much armor you have, how low your health is, and things like that. So, I don't know if you saw that list at all. It was basically what you'd expect: Molten Giants, Youthful Brewmasters. It played things like Cleave, Whirlwinds, Warsong Commander, Shield Blocks, and things like that. The War Axe that costs 2 to control early game, and then just comboed off to kill you. And the guy had pretty good success with it, obviously.
Yeah, so I think I've played versus that deck once or twice. So I think I don't know how it does versus the really fast aggressive decks. Because I mean, I imagine he needs a little bit of time to draw like his cards or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, because yeah, you can obviously if you have like double Molten Giant, double Youthful Brewmaster, and a Warsong Commander that's like 30 exactly, right? Because
Yeah.
16, you pick your 2 giant. No, it's more than 30. It's like
It's like 36 or something like that,
yeah,
or
but like
32, or plus the
versus
the brewmasters can attack too.
yeah, that's what I mean. So, but like versus the aggressive decks, you need time to get to
hmm
that position. I mean, you can obviously if you're playing a bunch of removal, but I mean, if he's obviously did really well with it, so I'm not saying it's a bad deck. I'm
Yeah.
just saying I'm not sure how well it does versus the control
He
decks.
also said against some decks, like some of the mage decks, he's like sometimes you just have to. He's like you don't always get a combo off. He did a good write up. It was really nice of him to put together such a intricate, detailed, breakdown of the deck. He's like sometimes you just have to run guys out and start murdering the aggro decks early, and you just can't set up the combo and fight off the early aggro and then just kill them through your own guys. But sometimes you get to set up the combo and be like, bam, 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 you're dead right off, right out of the hand around like turn 6 or 7, depending how much damage. And he said a lot of mages they had to be careful, obviously, because like you said, at those levels, you play a lot of the same people, and people had to be careful around how low they got his health, because you don't want to give him free Molten Giants where he can run out like Warsong Commander and free Molten Giants and just end your game. So it was really interesting. It was great to see a warrior list. A lot of people were always quick to jump on, oh, warrior's unplayable, and this guy's like, whatever, check this out. Warriors.
Yeah, yeah, Warrior's been popping up, I think, a little bit. So it's a deck.
Okay, well, I think we've gone over everything we wanted to talk about tonight for our first video, which, like you guessed, is going to be about an hour long. We're running on 55 minutes. um, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks for those who watch now. We'll upload this to YouTube, and we're going to try to make an MP3 available for those who want to listen to it without a video involved for those who didn't get the whole bit. Like I said, we've been making videos before. We talk about Magic a lot. For a card shop, we play it, and we're all playing Hearthstone. We still play Magic, but we're talking about Hearthstone. So we'll be making some more of these when we feel like there's stuff to talk about, and when things are fun, we'll probably do some matches here in the future, I'd imagine, as well, since now we've covered things. But I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So thanks for watching, and I'm Dan.
And this is Drew.
And we'll see you guys all later.